He was so caught up in the conversation that he didn't notice his drink had been spiked with a sedative, knocking him unconscious. After that, Nidhi and Rockme took him to a room, undressed him, and started filming everything on their phones from different angles. It was as if they were pretending that Mr. Prakash was still conscious. Every time the camera was aimed at his face, Nidhi would gently close his eyes with her hand and whisper, "Let's close his eyes to make it more thrilling." Despite being unconscious, he appeared to be aware of what was happening, even though it was all just a facade. Meanwhile, the two girls continued to do as they pleased, playing around with his body, all while capturing the moment on film. Hey there! Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into another chilling real-life story from around the world. This one comes from Tiruchirappalli city in Tamil Nadu, India. It's a truly unique case that's sure to spark your curiosity. And believe me, it's a story you won't want to miss. So, what's the full story behind this case? Let's dig into it and find out more. Alright, before we dive into this story, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to share it with your friends. Now, let me tell you what happened. So, here's the story. Back in 1972, a woman named Sakshi was born. She graduated from Tiruchirappalli State College, and by the year 2000, she got married to a man named Prakash. Together, they had 2 kids. Prakash worked as a report examiner for a credit card company, and people often described him as quiet, submissive, and overly innocent. Sakshi, on the other hand, was the dominant figure in the marriage, though she still respected Prakash and didn't argue with him. Even though she was the one making most of the decisions at home, she never undermined him. Sakshi's professional life was a different story. Since 2007, she had been teaching at various secondary schools in Tiruchirappalli city. By 2013, she landed a permanent position as a lecturer at the foreign language university in the region. While many students admired her beauty, they also feared her sharp tongue. She was known for being bitchy, cynical, and extremely strict as an examiner or lecturer. Students would go out of their way to avoid having her as their thesis supervisor because it was almost impossible to graduate under her watch. Revisions were endless, and she was infamous for failing theses left and right. Sakshi's tough personality didn't come out of nowhere. She was raised by a father who had been a soldier in Myanmar, a man notorious for his harsh discipline. That strict upbringing clearly left a mark on her. On top of that, she seemed to intentionally keep her students at a distance, especially the female ones. Many disliked her for it. Maybe it was her way of maintaining authority, ensuring they didn't challenge her. She never smiled at them, not once. But at home, she was a completely different person, a loving, nurturing mother who only got strict when absolutely necessary. Now, fast forward to August 2016. 2 students, Nidhi, 19, and Rockme, 20, were in their second semester at the foreign language college in Tiruchirappalli. They were in the same class, and, naturally, a lot of guys liked them because they were fun and beautiful. But like most young people, they sometimes acted out, doing things without much thought. That didn't sit well with Mrs. Sakshi. She had a knack for singling them out and making harsh remarks that would crush anyone's self-esteem. She'd call them too naughty, brainless, or even accuse their parents of raising them poorly. Nidhi and Rockme quietly took the insults because they knew standing up to Sakshi would only put their grades at risk. No matter what they did, Sakshi always seemed to find fault with them. If one of them looked a little tired in class, Sakshi would throw a jab like, "Were you out selling yourself all night? Is that why you're sleepy now?" Or if they failed to complete an assignment, she'd sneer and say, "Spent all that time dressing up instead of studying? Not like it helps. You're not that pretty anyway." These comments stung, and it was clear she targeted them more than anyone else. With the other students, she wasn't as cruel, but with Nidhi and Rockme, it felt personal, like she genuinely hated them. Interestingly though, Nidhi and Rockme weren't particularly close before all this started. But as the targets of Sakshi's scorn, they bonded over their shared experiences. What began as casual classmates eventually turned into a close, unshakable friendship, forged by their shared struggle to survive the wrath of their lecturer. As time went on, Nidhi and Rockme never saw Sakshi again in their remaining semesters. Their resentment toward her slowly faded as they matured, and life moved on. But when their 5th semester started in January 2018, things took a surprising turn. Nidhi had started dating a guy named Raghav from another department. He was known for his love of singing, and the two quickly became close. Coincidentally, Raghav happened to be taking a course taught by none other than Sakshi. To everyone's surprise, Sakshi absolutely adored him. She praised him endlessly, calling him smart, hardworking, attentive, and the kind of student every teacher dreams of. He quickly became her favorite. But here's where it gets messy. Raghav later confided in Nidhi that Sakshi wasn't just friendly, she was flirtatious. She would send him overly flattering and even seductive messages. According to Raghav, she acted coquettish and mischievous, often texting him with compliments that crossed the line. Things escalated when Sakshi invited him to a hotel to keep her company, while her husband was away on a business trip. Raghav turned her down, making up excuses, but he couldn't hide the awkwardness from Nidhi. When Raghav told Nidhi, she was understandably shocked and jealous. She couldn't believe that the same woman who once insulted her and called her a paid girl was now chasing after her boyfriend. It felt ironic, even hypocritical. Nidhi shared everything with Rockme, who burst out laughing at the absurdity of it all. The once feared, super-disciplined lecturer was now caught acting completely out of character. She called us bad girls, but look at her now, Rockme joked. She's basically offering herself for free. Things came to a head a few days later when Sakshi saw Raghav riding his motorcycle with Nidhi. The sight of them together visibly unsettled her. She pulled Raghav aside and asked about his relationship with Nidhi. When he told her they were dating, Sakshi's attitude toward him shifted dramatically. The once beloved student was now ignored, scolded, and even given poor grades. What Nidhi didn't know at the time was that Sakshi had secretly arranged a meeting with Raghav at the Tiruchirappalli Royal Hotel. She threatened him, saying he wouldn't pass the course unless he complied. Raghav, fearing he'd have to repeat the course the following year, reluctantly agreed to meet her. During their meeting, Sakshi demanded that he break up with Nidhi. Dating her will ruin your focus, she told him. You'll fail, and your dreams will be destroyed. Besides, Nidhi and her friend are bad news. Don't throw away your life for them. Think of your parents and your future. She didn't stop there. She warned him that if she ever saw him with Nidhi again, she'd make sure he failed her class. Terrified, Raghav began to distance himself from Nidhi. He ignored her texts and calls, leaving her heartbroken and confused. She assumed he was just trying to focus on his studies and decided not to push him. For 2 weeks, they barely spoke, their relationship hanging in limbo with no closure. Then, 2 months later, Nidhi heard from a friend that Raghav had been spending a lot of time with Sakshi. The two were often seen together on campus, sharing intimate smiles in class. Other students began whispering about their suspicious closeness. That's when everything clicked for Nidhi. It all made sense, why Raghav had suddenly pulled away and why Sakshi seemed so determined to keep them apart. Raghav had once confided in her that Sakshi had invited him to sleep with her, and now it seemed like he'd given in to her manipulation. Nidhi realized that Sakshi likely used her authority and the threat of failing grades to control him. Furious and heartbroken, she immediately told Rockme, who quickly pieced everything together. It has to be Sakshi, Rockme said. She's always hated us, and now she's using her power to get what she wants. Poor Raghav didn't stand a chance. In May 2018, Nidhi and Rockme finally managed to convince Raghav to meet them at a mutual friend's house. There, they confronted him about what Sakshi had asked him to do, suspecting that the breakup had everything to do with her. Raghav admitted it was true. He confessed that he had deliberately cut off all communication with Nidhi because of Sakshi's threats. She had made it clear that if he stayed in a relationship with Nidhi, she would fail him in her class. However, Raghav tried to reassure Nidhi, promising that once the exams were over and the grades were finalized, he would come back to her. It was all just to ensure he passed the course. This revelation, of course, infuriated both girls. Why did Sokshi seem so determined to sabotage Nidhi's happiness? And then, to make matters worse, Rogov dropped another bombshell. Sokshi had coerced him into a physical relationship, claiming she was lonely and her husband had grown distant. Hearing this, Rockme came up with an idea for revenge, and Nidhi, still burning with anger, agreed. At first, they wanted to convince Rogov to report Sokshi to the police, as what she had done was clearly harassment. But Rogov refused, saying he was too embarrassed and just wanted to focus on getting good grades in her class. A few days later, Sokshi received shocking news from one of her children. 2 girls had shown up at their house, looking for her. Since she wasn't home, the girls had instead spoken to her husband, Mr. Prakash, for over an hour. When Mr. Prakash mentioned the names Siska and Zotsa, Sokshi was confused. She didn't recognize those names. Her husband also described them as one girl with short hair and the other with blonde hair. Still, Sokshi couldn't recall any students that matched those descriptions. She brushed it off, thinking it wasn't important, especially since they hadn't called her even after being given her phone number. Fast forward to the evening of June 8, 2018. Mr. Prakash met Siska and Zotsa again, who were, in fact, Nidhi and Rockme in disguise. They had invited him to dinner at Hotel Mendung Inda under the pretense of needing to discuss a small college-related issue involving Sokshi. During the meal, Mr. Prakash noticed their hair had changed and casually asked about it. The girls laughed it off, saying they loved switching up their look. What Mr. Prakash didn't know was that the girls had spiked his drink with a sedative. Before long, he was unconscious. The girls then carried him to a hotel room, stripped him of his clothes, and began filming themselves in compromising positions with him. They made it look as though Mr. Prakash was conscious, occasionally pretending to interact with him. Every time the camera was pointed at his face, they strategically covered his eyes with Nidhi's hand, with her joking, "Close his eyes first to make it look better." In reality, Mr. Prakash remained unconscious throughout the ordeal. But the girls meticulously edited the footage, ensuring it appeared as if he were an active participant. They even staged scenes that made it seem like they were intimately engaging with his body. Once the video was complete, they sent it directly to Sokshi's phone. The moment she saw it, she completely lost control. Furious and humiliated, Sokshi was thrown into a rage, realizing the consequences of what had transpired. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of Nidhi and Rockme's plan for revenge. The morning of June 9, 2018, was a chaotic one. Mr. Prakash woke up alone in the hotel, completely confused about how he ended up there. Panicking, he rushed home, only to be met with his wife, Sokshi, in a fit of rage. She shoved her phone in his face, showing him the video that had been sent to her. Shocked and horrified, Mr. Prakash tried to explain that he had no idea what had happened and told her about his dinner meeting with the 2 girls, Siska and Zotsa. It didn't take long for Sokshi to piece together the truth. She realized that Siska and Zotsa were fake names and quickly connected the dots. This had to be Nidhi and Rockme. Fueled with anger, she stormed off to the college, determined to find them. But neither of the girls was there. A student eventually gave her the address to Rockme's rented house, so Sokshi went straight there, only to find Rockme alone. Nidhi wasn't home. What followed was a heated confrontation between Sokshi and Rockme, drawing the attention of several neighbors. The argument escalated quickly, with both women exchanging threats. Rockme boldly declared that she would file a police report against Sokshi for harassing Raghav, saying that this was all revenge for the way she had treated him. The tension boiled over as the two began slapping and grabbing at each other, but things took a dark turn when Sokshi pulled a gun from her bag and fired at Rockme at close range. The shot left everyone stunned. Witnesses watched in horror as the 23-year-old student collapsed and took her last breath on the spot. Sokshi tried to flee the scene, but the crowd stopped her and held her until the police arrived to take her into custody. Meanwhile, Nidhi was devastated when she learned what had happened to her best friend. The entire situation spiraled far beyond what she and Rockme had planned. Their intention was only to embarrass Sokshi and possibly involve the police if necessary, using the evidence they had against her for harassing Rogov. But the lecturer, known for her cold, calculated and self-centered nature, had gone to unimaginable lengths, resorting to murder to settle the score. Later, during Sokshi's trial, her lawyer claimed that the gun had been inherited from her late father, a former army officer, and that she had never used it before. He argued that her anger had reached a breaking point after discovering the video of her husband in compromising situations, manipulated by Nidhi and Rockme. The hotel staff also testified, confirming the girls had used fake names and wigs during their interactions with Mr. Prakash, further fueling Sokshi's sense of betrayal. However, Nidhi's testimony shed light on the darker side of Sokshi's behavior. Rogov shared his chat history with the court, exposing Sokshi's constant attempts to manipulate him. The messages were filled with insults about Nidhi and Rockme, calling them cheap, sugar daddy mistresses, and prostitutes, claims that were never substantiated. The prosecutor grilled Sokshi, asking, "Where's your proof that they were peddling themselves?" She had no answer. Even Mr. Prakash was left stunned when he learned about his wife's inappropriate relationship with Rogov. He testified that she often took Rogov to hotels under the guise of needing companionship because her husband was supposedly distant and unloving. To him, this behavior was not only deeply disappointing but also unbefitting of someone who was supposed to be a role model for her students. On December 5, 2018, the High Court of Tiruchirappalli in Tamil Nadu delivered its verdict. Sokshi was found guilty of premeditated murder and the misuse of firearms. The 46-year-old former lecturer was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Her teaching license was permanently revoked by the Tiruchirappalli Education Department, effectively ending her career. Nidhi didn't walk away unscathed either. Her actions, while not as severe, were deemed misconduct, as her scheme against Mr. Prakash was considered the catalyst for the entire tragedy. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison. Rogov, on the other hand, was cleared of all charges. The court determined that he had no knowledge of Nidhi and Rockme's plan to trap Mr. Prakash and had only been a victim of Sokshi's manipulation. In the end, this entire ordeal left lives shattered, futures destroyed, and legacies tarnished, all because of one lecturer's unchecked power and two students' desperate bid for revenge. What lessons can we learn from this story?